Hi there, my name's Kate Smith. I'm Associate Professor in 18th Century History at the University of Birmingham, and I'm here talking today about research with Megan Cameron. Megan, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi, my name is Megan Cameron. I'm a final year university student at the University of Birmingham studying history. Yeah, that's about it really.
Wonderful. So you've just recently submitted your dissertation. Can you tell us, what's the title of the dissertation? What's it about?
So the title of the dissertation was Elite Female Friendships, Gossip and Scandal, circa 1700 to 1810. I was focusing on elite female friendships and how they utilised gossip and the talk of scandal to not only affirm alliances, but also find identity and agency and freedom within their lives. And yeah, focusing mainly on the upper classes, but not necessarily titled individuals, but anyone who had access to this kind of connection and network of women who possibly were in court or, kind of in that realm of the world.
That sounds really interesting. So how did you kind of come to this project? How did you arrive at it?
So originally I was wanting to do something along the lines of looking at samplers and embroidery. It's something that I do, and it was something that I was kind of interested in, but I then went and did some volunteering work at Berkeley Castle over the summer and learnt about the women there during the 18th century and how interesting they were and how scandalous and kind of how much gossip was around them, but we don't really talk about it. It's something that we kind of ignore because of this idea of politeness and virtue. But even Berkeley, which is like an incredible place to work, and it was fantastic, but because they know their audience, they don't necessarily talk about the sex scandals that these women have, because the older people who are visiting don't necessarily want to know about that. So or they don't think they want to know about that. So it was kind of, for me, I wanted to look at it in a sense of, I don't see gossip as a negative thing, like a wholly negative thing. I see it as a form of bonding, foremost a form of bonding. And I think that to suggest and focus on these women as like solely virtuous or polite is doing them a disservice. And I don't think they would consider themselves to be wholly polite and virtuous. They were very vicious on occasion, and I think not focusing on those aspects of these women is doing them a disservice, really.
Yeah, that sounds really great. I mean, it's particularly in terms of trying to, one of the things I always think about in my own research is trying to kind of get at the complexity of people's lives, and the idea that you can absolutely kind of be polite, a polite individual involved in polite society, but also have a realm in your life in which you are involved perhaps in scandal or interested in scandal or discussing scandal. These things are not entirely mutually exclusive in any one life. So really interesting to kind of think about how this becomes kind of mixed up and complicated. How did you, I'm interested though also in like the notion of scandal. And of course that's kind of really culturally contingent. So what is a scandal in the 18th century, or what was a scandal in your thesis, in your dissertation?
So I was mainly focusing on, obviously gossip is the talk of scandal, or like things that they don't have to be majorly scandalous. They can just be, oh, did you hear about so-and-so's son doing something that wasn't necessarily correct? And I was mainly focusing on sex scandal because it's mainly what these women were involved in, but I was also focusing on how they gained economic freedom through gambling tables and setting up like faro tables in their own parlors. And then when the French Revolution came along, a lot of men such as Edmund Burke kind of, even if they knew these women and were friends with these women who were educated and smart and involved in things that men were involved in as well, they kind of saw that the women in French court were the point of blame for a lot of the French Revolution. And they were like, we can't have these women be sexually promiscuous and gambling, because that's what happened in France and they had a revolution and we don't want that. So a lot of, at the end of the 18th century, I think I argue it as a very unique period where elite women had a sense of freedom and agency that they don't necessarily get after the French Revolution, not for a while anyway. And so for me, I was focusing a lot on gambling, so Georgiana, Duchess of Devonshire, big one, and sex scandals. So Grosvenor, the new female coterie, I think, are a fascinating group of women who really aren't talked about enough. Seymour Worsley as well. So for me, it was, when I was arguing what scandal was, it was really anything that kind of went against very much like fiercely went against conduct literature and or was trying to be put down through law. So lots of there was people trying to put laws through about these women and like women being sexually promiscuous. There was lots of debating societies who focused on the fact that, you know, is it okay for women, even if their husband is a really bad person, to be going and defiling the marriage bed? And it's a lot of obviously the sexual double standard and people being ignorant, but that's not necessarily their fault. And for me, so when I was talking about scandal, I was really focusing on sex and gambling, because really that's what these women were mainly involved in. And I think it's also quite interesting the fact that lots of like gambling and having affairs would have been turned a blind eye to if you don't go too out of the way. So Elizabeth Derby, she has an affair with the Duke of Dorset, but what really kind of put her into social exile was the fact that she separated from her husband. She went off into the country while her husband was still in town. And that was really what put her into social exile, and not the fact she was having this affair. No one really cared that she was having an affair. They were all having affairs, but it was really going against conduct and what was proper that got her sent off to Switzerland, really. So yeah, I think it's quite a complicated one, but you really have to try and define it when you want to talk about it.
Yeah, and it's interesting how it illuminates where the borders and lines are in a society. So these kind of moments where what is it that actually turns a kind of scandal into something that, you know, ends up with people in exile or being alienated from society? Like, where are the lines actually drawn? And I think one of the interesting things for me about the 18th century is just how, particularly in kind of the, you know, the early part of the 18th century, there's actually kind of great fluidity in society around sexuality, around gender. But once we kind of enter the Victorian period and the kind of later 18th century, lines start to be drawn seemingly with much more aggressively. Yeah. And the 18th century is really interesting for just how things are constantly changing. The lines are actually constantly changing, and it's quite difficult, apart from if you're, in some ways, you need to look at these things on a kind of case study by case study basis in order to really see how different situations are greeted with very different responses. And you know, that's so often kind of linked to questions of status and of gender, and around kind of questions, particularly kind of female desire. And of course, that's, you know, long been a question in society and continues to be today. I did some early work looking at early work on kind of ceramics, and ceramics were often kind of used as a kind of stand-in for women and women's bodies and women, and the consumption of ceramics as around kind of female desire and a need to kind of control and police that, and to kind of satirize that. Yeah. So I wonder, with your project, like the kinds of sources that you've been working on to try and get at these kind of moments of scandal, or the kind of gossip around scandal, how have you actually excavated that? Well,
obviously it's mainly letters. It's a huge amount of letters. My entire first chapter is dedicated to correspondences and how particularly the concept of the familiar letter comes into being in the 18th century. And how it can help women escape, you know, feeling isolated from their society, particularly when lots of these elite women were married into Jacobite alliances, and so they went often to France in exile during the 18th century, and they were isolated from their social group. And lots of them, the letters of, you know, how ridiculous and how earnestly ridiculous people in court were. They were, the amount of pride and vanity that could come about, that was spoken about by people like Lady Mary Wortley Montagu to her sister who was in exile, and to try and stop them from being isolated. So it's a huge amount of letters, and they are so important throughout my entire dissertation. And I think moving forward for me, no matter what I do, it's going to be a huge amount of letters, just because that's the best thing we've got. And obviously they're a complicated source because they are a performance, and these women were aware of like an epistolary excellence they were expected to like write, and so obviously it's not completely true, and there will be some embellishment along the way, but even that is important, and what they choose to embellish and what they decide is important to include, and how they edit themselves is equally as important and equally right. And then it's also was a lot of newspapers and things like the Tatler and the Spectator, because at the beginning of the 18th century, these periodicals really are about gossip and elite and upper class people's gossip, and it was very much aimed at women. They were like, this is going to be for you, because women were so associated with the tea table and tea table chat, and they were like, oh, this is going to be for you as well. And so there's such a deep connection to it. And I also think that those kind of sources are super interesting, and Ingrid Tague does this a lot, and for the past 20 odd years it's kind of been like a central focus in the field is this behavior and ideology, and how those two things interact with each other. Because I would argue that gossip, while impolite, is integral to politeness. It's rude to put someone down when they try and gossip with you. When someone's trying to gossip with you, if you try and go, oh no, I'm not interested in talking about that, it's rude to them. They were trying to bond with you, and they were trying to like make a connection and bring you into their group, and you've gone, no, I'm not interested. And so there are politeness structures within an impolite form of communication, and I think that's really, really interesting.
Definitely. And I think gossip, that's really interesting in terms of thinking about gossip as a kind of sign of intimacy in relationships. What you're prepared to share and when between women is really important. And obviously I'm not surprised in some ways that you're working with letters. I'm sure you've had lots of like moments in the archive there, or kind of reading these letters digitally, where you're kind of like, oh, what does that say though? I've always like had those moments. It's always the key word that you can't quite decipher. But I mean, 18th century letters also are kind of public documents in some ways, right? Because they are often shared or circulated with friends and family. So how do you think that works with letters that include, how does that work in relationship to gossip? Do you think, some letters are actually kind of being retained or are being dealt with more secretly, or are these letters being passed on as a means of circulating gossip? Like, how did you deal with that?
I think that, so I lots of people like Hester Piozzi and Hugh Blair at the time were conflating familiar letters with familiar chat, and like this idea of it being an extension of oral conversation. And so I focus a lot on Lady Mary Coke, because she's so I would say blunt in a lot of ways. I don't think she's intending to be like this. I think it's for her sisters and a few of her close friends. And so there isn't necessarily a lot of needing for her to need to edit herself, because they're quite private until they're later published after her death. And so a lot of the time, I think that gossip in letters being an extension of the oral conversation, they do it explicitly. They'll talk about, oh, I'm sure you've heard from Lady so-and-so that X, Y, and Z has happened. And there's an expectation that these pieces of information will be shared amongst one another. And it's not seen as necessarily rude to do that, and it is expected that will happen. It's expected that will either happen within other letters or around the tea table, or when they next meet. There's even allusions to quite vague occasions. So there's a point in Lady Mary Coke's work where she says some people's behaviour, and there's a suggestion that we're going to talk about this later, but I can't talk about this in the letter because it's just too good to not talk about this with you in person. Because I think it's also a lot of me going, well, I do that with my friends, and this is kind of the structure that happens now, and I can't imagine that it's too different. And the letters prove that it is not too different from now when we gossip with our friends. And so I talk a lot about the fact that who people associate with is just as important as who they don't associate with. Judith Butler talks about this a lot. Sarah Brophy talks about this a lot, about how who you choose to gossip with and who you choose to gossip about are like integral to who you are and who you like, how you construct your own identity. And so I think that when it comes to like how these letters interact with gossip, and how these wider social networks and the passing around of letters, and there's even evidence to suggest that these women would fold up their letters, send it to someone, and then that letter would then be sent on to someone else, and it would just kind of go around in a circle, because paper was expensive and they didn't want to write it more than once. And so I think that it's just it's so much fun when you read their work, because it's recognizable even now. It's like, yeah, that's something that I would say about my friend, like to my friends about someone. And I think it's quite nice that there's this extension across time of similarity. It's quite nice to see.
Definitely. And it's interesting in terms of what you were saying about the kind of movement of these letters around and kind of explicit instructions to move them around to certain people. And it made me think a little bit, I did some work on kind of women of the East India Company and the kinds of roles they played as kind of brokers of information and knowledge, but also as kind of makers of ideas, the idea of home and kind of Britain as home. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that's, you know, really important to conceptions of home is also like who is excluded from a particular home, and you make a home not only by including people but also by excluding certain people. And I wonder kind of the extent to which this operates for the circulation of gossip as well. Are there kind of moments in which people are very much excluded from these kind of networks of gossip and information?
I think that I mean the who is friends and who is family is massively blurred. Naomi Tadmore talks a lot about this. She kind of defined that what we consider friendship now and what was considered friendship then is quite different. And so a lot of the women who I talk about are sisters, but they're also friends, and they make the choice to be friends. You could quite easily not really talk to your family, particularly once you've married off. Like there's really no reason if you don't want to talk to your family. But to actively make the choice to be friends with certain people is quite fun. Sorry, I'm just gonna open that up. And so I think that when I talk about exclusion in my work, I'm talking mostly about like who are they gossiping about, and who that's an exclusion, because they're so interrelated with one another through marriage, or just like, you know, my great grandfather was married to her great grandmother or something like that, and you're like distant cousins in some way, because it's such a small group of people. It's such a small percentage of people in terms of England. And so Lady Mary Coke, her sister is married to Lord Stafford, and his niece is Lady Grosvenor, who they talk about a lot in their correspondences and their journals. But Lady Mary Coke, despite the fact that she's actively excluding and separating herself from Lady Grosvenor, because they're family, at one point, Lord and Lady Grosvenor stay in Lady Coke's house in Notting Hill, and there's this closeness to them, and the upkeep of like aristocratic familial duty is just as important, and still works while they're socially excluding them and socially gossiping about them. And I think like I talk a lot about how that relationship is quite an interesting one, and the dynamic between family and friends and how they kind of coincide so deeply with one another. You can be actively excluding someone, like the Duchess of Portland actively excludes Georgiana after she all of her economic debt and all of that kind of comes out. She actively excludes her, despite the fact they're family, and they're still considered family. They don't not consider each other family. There's this like disconnect of we aren't friends anymore, and I think that kind of is an interesting one to kind of talk about, because there is this duty, even if they don't like each other, and there's still this upkeep of we have to keep up appearances almost.
Definitely. So I guess my kind of final question is that on our TV screens at the moment, of course, we have this like version of kind of Regency England and gossip in Bridgerton. So I'd be super interested to know what you think of Bridgerton.
Bridgerton, I think the big thing for me about Bridgerton is this moment, I think it's in the first season, and the mother says, we'll do what women do, we'll gossip. And that's the way they resolve the situation. They see it as a solution to something. And there are many issues with Bridgerton, people who are far more qualified than me to talk about. There are so many issues of race and queer baiting, and there's a lot of problems I have with the show. And apparently the books are even worse. But the show, I think, is so interesting because it's revived this, not only the rom-com as kind of a genre, but this desire to see this aestheticized kind of version of the past, and I think that that's fine. The first season I think was trying to be somewhat historically accurate and it didn't work, but I think the second season was significantly better. I enjoyed it so much more, and there was a sense of, in terms of gossip, like this whole Lady Whistledown concept. I think it's somewhat similar to how Mr. Spectator acts within the Spectator as a pamphlet or as a periodical. I think it's somewhat interesting because lots of the people who were writing about this gossip were part of the social scene, and they were going to the balls, and that's how they were accessing this. And to have this kind of wallflower character being the one who watches everything, I think it's a really interesting concept. The letters that these women produce do suggest that this is kind of what happened. It's a lot of, oh, I was sat in court, I was sat in the drawing room, and so they laughed so loudly at what the Duke of Cumberland said, and I think they're having an affair. And I think that's quite fun. I think that it's fun to see that played out on screen. There are many issues with it. I'm not going to sit here and pretend there aren't, but it is fun, and I hope we see more of that. Mm-hmm. I personally would like to see more of what Emma 2020 did in terms of costuming, because it's perfect. But I think it's really fun to see just this kind of this Gossip Girl version of the past. It's fun, and I think that's all that people really care about, and I think it's important right now as well. This is such an escapism, and I don't think people talk about it as a historical drama or a historical romantic drama. It's a fantasy. It's pure fantasy, and that's fun, and it's so much fun. I would love to see I think both Eloise and Benedict, I would love to see them have queer storylines. I think that would be really important and also really interesting from the basis of history, because they do try and include historical stuff in there, but I think that would be really fun. I think we probably won't get it. It's not representation isn't something we typically get, but I think that it would be really lovely to see, because I think you've got so many siblings, why not? There has to be one of them. But yeah, Bridgerton's an interesting one because it's trying, and I think that's important. But in terms of gossip, it's quite interesting to see it play out, because I would say that part is quite accurate. They do gossip about each other, and it is it's a solution to many problems, and it's what gets into a lot of trouble. But yeah, I think I don't know, it's fun. The second season was a lot better in my opinion, to be honest.
Fantastic, great. Well, thanks ever so much, Megan, and it's been great to be able to discuss your research.